Hello, Wethersfield parents and families and schools. They have been attaching kids to faked and changed communications with everyone around them and the motivations for it, even when they are real motivations, based on things like having to have roles with things like even peaceful electrical generation and all these different countries share. Here and there, our campus is tactically ulterior from how nature shows us to be valuable as a human species body united while simultaneously not. We are a human species body of individual bodies, with all group differences being generated by that which is showing us too. It is generating other species bodies. People say, oh God, whatever. That's, in other words, I'm saying about functional, how it is distinctly hyper invisible, but still discernible. Not us nor them, but it is all things anyway. For science, we could observe this and have answers by it, but we have those answers replaced under the name of science. At the same time, we have our founders' communications replaced. James Madison's plan before he was a president, it was his plan that George Washington agreed to help and to use, even though no one had free speech, had the ability of free speech, because everyone's syntax had already been sustained roles against everyone else to an extent while pretending to have free speech, otherwise being censored, even if as a majority of people, even if as everyone, and that was adapted to. People disallow. I mean, they don't allow people to be honest. They have prohibited us to be honest about the extortion of George Washington, our first president, what he communicated about it. And what he communicated about it is distinct from what he said, because what everyone said was measured and maintained. Not only did he not, our presidents haven't have free speech, the ones after them still didn't have. And there are proofs that they still don't have free speech. And or the difference of the individuals as leaders not having free speech or the individuals of the rest of the species body. Because we are systems tactical ulterior from its one that appreciates itself as the finite. Distinctly, a little bit favors that part more one way, while it favors simultaneously the other way. The part where it is hyper simultaneous, before favoring another, it shows us this. We can observe this, but the nature of debate is reliant upon people with the names of the sciences and the names of people just they're published, and the nature of debate using that as evidences, not affording people to use the hyper evidential, for example, or so to speak. We have white pupils, we have black pupils, whites of eyes. You guys have left out that inseparable from how the breaching method caused slavery, sickly distinctly northern colonies and southern colonies. You guys defend with your arguments things that you have read through the books, sickly distinctly at campuses A through Z, and you value the difference when you're arguing with each other, while blaming other things, others, ourselves, for things that both nature and our founders communicated for us to blame on the human fact-sheeping nature breaching method that was entrenched, that caused slavery. Their limited counters to it and how they had to leave it northern colonies and southern colonies entrenched, because they had to stay monitored by internationally monitored conversations. Themselves, those countries already being and having been. I mean, having been criminally foreign influence, tactically, the same thing was entrenched there. That did it through them here. It did that through other means and things, and it's using everyone remotely A through Z. Leaving out and self-valuing how while you're using remotely things right where no one values it. But everyone on mass scale blaming other things, others ourselves, while blaming other things, others ourselves valuing the having been. for things again. Our founders communicated for us to blame them back. Facts should be made. And our founders' communications are distinct from what they said. And they demonstrably communicated about that too, for us to appreciate that. And how people would pretend to appreciate it by using the knowledge of good and evil. For example, to get over on what is correlation nature, to get over on to keep blame on things others ourselves. The breaching methods rolls with the singular breaching methods use of differences. Again, we are a human species body of individual bodies with all group differences generated by that which showing us it is not us that invented all the different qualities, aspects, in nature of ways. Other species bodies, even plant life, is distinct from ourselves, but it is also non-distinct. And it is simultaneously with ourselves, but per that also further hyper simultaneous. Not us nor them, but as all things anyway. Anyway, but per science, it's an identity of value / value progression, distinct from all things, well, not, but anyway. So I'm referring to it as a hyper invisible, but still discernible. And it can be observed with grammar. There is one hyper conjunction to all the invisible, but still discernible parts of speech of English grammar. We could discern it inseparable from its parts, individually grouped and simultaneously, distinctly, non-distinctly, and simultaneously / hyper simultaneously, which is why one of the reasons I'm saying it longer that way. Two, it's because it's functional. How there are simultaneously where we could discern its one identity of value progression, we discern further also parts of itself. Because parts of the identity of all space / existence are beyond the parts that we could discern or have the potential to discern individually grouped and together. Like how it shows us. There's an extent to the past we know that it's true always. And there's more that we could know was true always. We could learn that. But there's always going to be a part about the past that we know is existent, but we know we don't know about it. And there's a part now, we're active, a whole bunch of truths that in truth we know is true always. Like these parts of truth, of time, / forever nature. In other words, there's a part now active, group truths we know. And then we know there is a part of there are active truths and groups that we know we don't know. And there is the value of seasons. There are the value of seasons relative to where we everywhere we can discern this thing, like nature shows us. It's not our species body. It is not other species bodies. That is the identity of value / value progression. That is everyone. In other words, that is neither, but is both anyway. All things anyway. It has its identity to the extent we could discern. It comes with its complete identity relationship to it. So, in the value of that, inside the nature of that, which is the rest of the complete identity of all space / existence, which will always stay beyond us. In other words, but as that value, distinctly, not just, but also non-distinctly, but also distinctly. So part of itself, and this is like, and the difference between how it is value as a nature or value as a body that we can discern. It is why and how we appreciate subject treatments. We can appreciate them individually grouped together. It's a relationship to the verbs. In other words, we need more than one name for verb. because, in other words, and for example, coupled and grouped the participle natures, the present participle and the past participle. They're about this time/forever nature as the body of all space/existence, which shows us it is functional being, how it is hyper invisible but still discernible, distinct from how it is invisible but still discernible. And there are exceptions. And but all the exceptions come with demonstration /s of the same thing. In other words, we need to have a scientific value for to discuss. Like, for example, one of the things that is true always, rather than variably true, that the laws that were entrenched before and through modern nations' foundings. I don't know what year Russia was founded, but it was founded before us. But still, in America, in Russia, and in Ukraine, the suburbs look almost exactly the same. Because before America's founders were born, there were internationally monitored conversations and roles with them that had slavery entrenched, northern colonies and southern colonies. No, and they had and still has employment /s of everything it did to force, trick, hurt, and persuade, names A through Z, to speak about sciences, pretending not to be able to fathom how they could be or were abridged. You know, we're supposed to get the Constitution unabridged and valuing hyper simultaneously why and how we have rights that are too numerous have to list, and hyper simultaneously why our founders, plural, asked us to refer to themselves as James Madison, singular. And then they went and got George Washington to agree to help them and to use that plan. He would have never had means to do it on his own. There are proofs that Native Americans are partially our founders too. But they didn't agree with themselves. No one knew how to respond properly because it divided people, specifically to keep people blaming other things, others themselves, for things that it did and caused. And then to defend that and give them means to get away with it as collusion /s for self-value, no one realizing, increasingly incapable of affording to be, let alone to protract the short words of anyone with the uses of the identity the sciences share functionally, which requires discernment of how it is the hyper invisible but still discernible. It can be used to lead us. See, Harvard Hospital has a whole bunch of people tied to a Leahy family with foreign and domestic intelligence. And there's, in other words, there are people involved with the town offices and the Board of Education. And when there are instances like with violence, in other words, Chris is a good person. One time, I hit the kid in the back, his friend. His father was a teacher at 6th grade. I believe that was before I was in 6th grade. And he was older than me, though, in other words. And already there were people involved, and our people increasingly involved with body dumping spots and with various natures of organized crimes, with retired mayors, and demonstrably with mayors standing intercities. Forgiveness is because to discern roles with the breaching method, which are discernible, it comes through discernment of where and how there are, like, for example, witch trials. If we pay attention, slavery was entrenched in northern colonies, southern colonies. And there's a witch trials place right near Webb House, now renamed the Webb Stevens House. And there's a nature of sense and sensibilities with positive treatments or with aggression. Or, in other words, the difference of that is still within that as psychopaths. They're involved with identity theft, fraud, slanders. People changing and faking what we say, what we communicate, actually, rather, with everyone around us, and interbranch, Wethersfield Police, with other federal agencies, and a whole bunch of people tied to it, as former director of the FBI, Robert Luskin, his co-defendants. Are increasingly involved with state police families, interstates, with names involved with bordering countries, and with the campuses and their educators, and with state with places associated with state police, like for Whiting Forensics, along the Burlington Turnpike, next to those locations. Criminally foreign influence, tactical collusion/S, with predicate acts with facts. I'm not a lawyer, thank God. So the courts, there are a number of judges and prosecutors. Brian Silver is one of the prosecutors involved. And also this guy had us he made an exception. He wasn't my sixth grade teacher. They made us go there a few times and for whatever reason. And he's the other sixth grade class. So they made us switch teachers. That proves that the FBI director and other foreign and domestic military families with Central Connecticut State University involved with Mr. Burstein, and with increasingly with people when I was in second and third grade. It started. They make confessions by timing where you're going to be to make it look like you got communications with people. Use the truth as a lie. And the difference of them as doing that as victims, or as victim predators, or as hyper victims, or as hyper predators, is also used, which is relative, because these are also people with some black KKK theme, Latino theme. Increasingly, these are people tied to the kids and to the family members of the leaders of the kids, intercities, and with names next to the campuses involved, acting tied to people who are putting them in fake communications and changed communications, just completely made up ties and natures of ties to strangers, as people next to the campuses too, increasingly, as ones involved with foreign and domestic intelligence, foreign and domestic military breached, leading up to the World Trade Center attack in that context and since, intercities and intra-cities. These are also people at and next to Fox Connecticut News, at and next to WFSB, at and next to WTNH, which the FBI is. People want to have nature debate. They want to use the value of their people involved with the Wethersfield Government Access Television, and tied to as one's name Peruta. I don't know them at all. I tried to make fake exception when I was a kid and then as an adult. I was just blatant and I had no communication. As one's involved with my sixth grade class. And before that, with people with a former Mayor Gold increasingly involved, with people from Central Connecticut State University intelligence community, and interreligious spots with child abusers, leaders of the kids, proven years apart, where they were time use/S roles of that, and of untimely deaths and murders, and names next to body dumping spots, totally different ones, and totally different reported killers. And those killers themselves used for other natures of organized crime, where everyone's attached to fake tape and changed communications with everyone else and everyone around them. As one's increasingly with Harvard Hospital's Institute of Living, who faked transcripts, forging doctors' names, putting people in whole fake conversations and transcripts into databases. And they have judges speaking fake things in records with them, fake motivations, using truths for lies. They have their family members involved, a whole bunch of people involved with the names Cololo, Gold, a former Mayor Gold, other mayors. There's a Ruth, who were apparently a relative of a mayor of Wethersfield, as one of the ones with the Board of Education, involved with people with Saudis that were forced to collusions with people with all these different countries that are clicked together here. Since I was a little kid, involved with predicate acts with facts, with differences and with the religious spots. You guys are out of your mind, pretend you care about passion, emotion, about anything. You leave black people's whites of eyes out. I don't care who you are. In other words, it's inseparable from proper subject treatments because nature itself is showing us bullshit. Speaks. All whisper creek. In other words, you guys can't defend A through Z yourselves properly. Otherwise, if we can't defend ourselves, if we can't defend Native American, how sickly distinctly the ground below them is tactically denatured. The ground below us all is tactically denatured. You admit that, in other words. So everyone's in other words. There are proofs that there are three natures of Native American founders before America was founded, but then we'll skip that part. In other words, that degree. Before America's founders were even born. Before there are proofs before that before Columbus sailed the ocean blue in 1492, already names A through Z of the human species body had imposed upon them, forced, tricked, hurt, persuaded to blame other things, others, ourselves for why and for how. Increasingly, no one can afford proper use /S of the names of the sciences, the names of the people of the sciences, or the difference of that, because of the relativity of how the nature communicates that we are and have been using systems, and as systems, tactical ulterior from its system that communicates with positive and negative, but not leaving out the difference between how to cause, the difference between causing criminal insidiousness natures of positive out of negatives, or causing hyper positives out of negatives. And the difference of checking simultaneously, constantly, contemplating its way. It's where evolution's fruits, gifts, means out of nowhere come. Security. It's where it comes from. Not sitting on a tactically denatured base designed before America's founders were even born, let alone with cars, everything. In other words, how are you? I'm not a professor. You know, I would have been by now. I was going to be an educator, professor, or a teacher. But in other words, before the World Trade Center attack, the federal agencies and courts and their family members and educators of the campuses, intercities, and intra-cities, they were being and had been used criminally for an influence. I didn't know all their names. Co-defendants of former director of the FBI, Robert Luskin, like a Thaddeus Grabowski, right before a 2006 district court case in New Haven, Connecticut. He is one of the ones on Fox Connecticut News in Hartford, Connecticut, with the intelligence next to them, all kinds of ways, criminally foreign influence, tactically delusions, raw, all kinds of wire crime acts and methods roles. As people collusion /S with recorded uses remotely of names on all sides of criminal and civil cases, the lawyers, the family members, the sources, and the same with the courts, and the same with the police forms, and the same with their sources. At the same time, with overt criminal enterprises and private ones, even when not involved with the cases, in a whole bunch of countries, building upon predicate acts with facts, methods /S roles, self-valued, only capable of being self-valued, or sensing anybody, even if it's a majority of people, even if it's everyone countering it. It's why and how we have encountered what we all want to counter about the black people's whites of eyes, that the breaching method clearer than day, a sign. I mean, reassign the communications of. And there's still, through our schools, multi-front collusion /S with that. Blaming other things, others ourselves, for what our founders communicated for us to blame it on. For example, the breaching method as a scientific value inside the communications of our founders, as James Madison singular. but that doesn't leave out the Native Americans. That's why president / chief. And that's why Native Americans have been fighting against Native Americans, because the value of the Constitution unabridged, and of why and how we should have rights that are too numerous to have to list them, let alone when the courts and everything, all the nature of the things that have been in collusion with the breaching method, including the prisons tied to them. And then they have to keep shut how they were, how they use truth for lies. So they had the self-value rules with torture that are now self-valued again. See, the countries, we need to give them meetings to at once speak about what they're not allowed to speak about, like about everything declassified, even tied to peaceful electrical generation. And this is forced. We have to do this by nature, because the breaching method employed how even the suburbs were tactically denatured, needing now value nature systems, not just criminally foreign influence, but hyper criminally foreign influence. That's why and how totally different countries had rules with such sick things overtly against the human nature. In other words. And with the differences, racketeering method worse than war crimes. Anyone wants to debate that having black people's white survives. When we hear the subject's syntax with it, we could discern that is one of the things involved with it is criminally foreign influence, tactically delusions are fact, human nature, quality, aspects in nature. Part of the reason we haven't formally appreciated this or socially is relative to where and how they get away with changing and faking what's actually digitally recorded. Wethersfield police have a Joshua Schumack involved with a Mark Violet and people all along Route 175 from the founding locations in Old Wethersfield and conjunctions to it. Involved with Cololo family and O'Brien family near me. Also with people with the name Kolvinskis, interstates involved with the FBI, foreign countries, foreign and domestic military. As ones tied to them, recorded, confessed, demonstrated, confirmed. Involved them with, these are people I never had classes with. And some people, there are people too that I had classes with, and nothing to do. They're trying to put fake exceptions. That's why they hid what they involved Ray Cololo with. Sometimes it's the people that influence Ray Cololo, say things, time things. Sometimes it's them. And the difference of that is also used remotely, criminally foreign influence, tactically delusions raw. Relativity. As his rules with proven years apart, child abusers, leaders of the kids, and a whole bunch of people at Hartford Hospital and at the corrections offices in Wethersfield / Hartford, and at the Wethersfield judicial offices and spots next to it, and names associated with them with that. There are a whole bunch of people tied to form a Heather Hansen and a Joe DeMoro who have roles with a whole bunch of different police forms and corners of the streets near me. And Joe DeMoro recorded, confessed, demonstrated, confirmed people with the name Klotz, involved with people with the name O'Connor and their kids, as people involved also with the kids of a Dean Judd, involved before the World Trade Center attack, involved with the FBI and courts and the family members and foreign and domestic military at town lines in intercities and next to campuses, involved with identity theft, fraud, slanders. They're putting predicate acts, illusions that they've been building upon. Intelligence, there are only 3 branches of government, kept them criminally foreign influence, tactically delusions raw. Easier than cake. The way. Because that's why they won't get onto paper and then make people fight with each other by making them pretend things are debatable. Then we have to explain the background. They're also lying about they're trying to fish for means to pretend they want privacy. Because they have a whole bunch of people that attach me to fake conversations, fake ties, fake natures of ties to them. But in other words, They'll tell you this. Whole bunch of people at New Britain Superior Court that will pretend other. At the same time, they'll tell you other when you ask them properly. They've been rules of all natures of organized crimes and refusing to identify themselves with the Wethersfield police and the other cities, judges and prosecutors, and people tied to them and their families at the judicial branch offices next to it, at the corrections offices next to it. And they're recorded how they are kept only capable of using their differences apart with their subject treatments, good or bad, proper or improper. Which is relative where it is recorded, functional. How the breaching method keeps other things, others ourselves, blamed for what it does, or it keeps roles, needs, and nature sensing anyone addressing that properly, sensing for itself. The breaching method, that country's A through Z. It's not by accident that the suburbs look almost exactly alike in America, Russia, and Ukraine, even though these are countries that have the means to traverse the earth. Even though the people who lived at the time wanted to build suburbs safer, a better identity relationship to itself, nature, and safer. In other words, this is a landscape theory that was shown the only means to cause positive value nature progressions more and more would be to self-value, not just criminal insidious natures of positives, means to cause positive value nature progressions, action natures, not just criminally foreign influence ones, but hyper-criminally foreign influence ones. Science itself shows us that distinct nature of criminal insidiousness nature of peace, like as a positive, that is used to stay. All the syntactical negative treatments, people, they're against war. But then when you call out, in other words, right through wars, psychiatry was with all kinds of delusions wrought and all kinds of natures of organized crimes, all kinds of natures of identity theft, fraud, slanders, and with the branches of government too, and ones with badges and gavels, and put speaking fake things because they are used remotely because they're showing they need to hide live progressions, and they need to hide things actively, and they need to hide things to come, and they need to hide their motivations because that is used. They are used remotely, A through Z. All even the sports names, even the celebrities, recorded use clearer than day, make fake examples of freedom of speech to measure and maintain freedom of speech. Not, in other words, anyone pretended passions, emotions, and in other words, anyone used passions, emotions to say who disbelieves. Like we needed about black people's rights to who disbelieves that having black people's rights survive. We could discern, having that left out with subject treatments about what slavery was about. Even if we don't know the breaching method was involved with it, we could discern it was about a breaching method. I mean, even though our founders communicated a breaching method about it, and they didn't have free speech, they communicated that. We're supposed to understand why and how they didn't have free speech. Way worse than just witch trials was entrenched at the same time, and using the difference of it as witch trials or as the other, A through Z, including as overt criminal enterprises and as terrorists, only capable of being. And then George Washington was born. Then, our founders before him were born. And then George Washington was born, rather. Narratives regarding all people wanted resistance before they had spoken up. They're speaking about tea tax. There was slavery entrenched. They said they need to waste time. They need to hide the real value of why and how, what they're doing with the time at the campuses. How all this time they made all those subject treatments. How come they don't bring up all the natures of organized crimes? They bring up subjects and roles with it that the courts had too, with their roles, hiding their roles with it, and the police forms. At the same time, a whole bunch of different countries, overt criminal enterprise, private ones, every subject they treat. They had collusion / yes, with all natures of crime scenes only capable of being. In other words, righteous just per blaming other things other than themselves. Roles. People that spoke about crimes, who have roles with these predicate acts with facts methods. Wethersfield police pretend they had conversations with me as a kid and now as an adult. Increasingly, there are names next to each of the campuses I went where there were time U/S of those people connected. Like a DeMoro family is increasingly involved. I saw him one time real quick when I was in fifth grade in 1986. He's increasingly involved with people from other countries and with our own interbranch that have been roles of various natures of predicate act. They got roles of home break-ins in my area with the police forms and with people involved with Washington, D.C. and the World Trade Center, who are also involved further with on and off the state judicial branch offices and the corrections offices and old Wethersfield as complete strangers and ones that I only know as strangers that sought me out to record, confess, demonstrate, confirm they were going to pretend other. And ones, that demonstrate that's true. Everyone's speaking through others. They'll tell you in the end, because they have readings of statutes too. They already recorded themselves. They're giving themselves the benefits of the doubt at the last second. And so they do things like, collude at locations, change the fake value, change the fake what's actually digitally communicated. And, replacing with too, changing the fake. Yeah. So further, there's a Joshua Julian involved with foreign and domestic military, who are also KKK, Confederate flag themed, Latino themed, and these are people also out of the state of Connecticut corrections offices and judicial branch offices, increasingly involved with predicate acts and various natures of organized crimes with the campuses, the same ones with the child campuses next to them. They were also involved intercities and with names next to the campuses of all ages and natures, including medical campuses and fire campuses, fire department families, recorded, confessed, demonstrated, confirmed. They were affected, needing to run in to hide lie progressions at Hartford Hospital, where they have self-value roles with uses of the rights to lie and uses of needs to pretend integrity. The only way they know how, fake. But they'll still get involved with other people's conversations they don't even know. Part of the way they get away with it is by using fake information put into databases since before computers at each age and nature of campus we went to. So Debbie Gold pretended she knew me when I was a kid to a teacher. She did a trick to pretend other. Like one time we had positive. We played dreidel with her. We had only positive interaction was real fast. I don't know if she was in my class at all. It was near a holiday. And then, like a year after that, she attacked me out of nowhere. I don't know if she was in my class that year or not. In other words, she verbally calling me all these names. I know that everyone. Now I found out there were men and women involved with spreading lies through kids and uses of their own. Increasingly, people with Hartford Hospital's Institute of Living have roles with a whole bunch of people tied to untimely death roles with them, years apart too. And the phenomenon of people from other areas who planted evidences on my street since I was a kid, where they have ties between them too, like a Robert Rodriguez. He brought up the principal upskirt Nature's campus to me, but he brought it up with some untimely death rolls and people with the name Scalora involved with the World Trade Center. Also people with the name Clo and DeMoro, who are further involved with wire crimes in Wethersfield police through time, and people with the name O'Brien with different police departments with them, and with Sandy Hook campuses. There's a guy who said Ray O'Brien. Might have meant a Ray Clo, because a Ray Clo and a Tim O'Brien and Andrew O'Brien and their parent, like a Dennis O'Brien. They have something to do with foreign and domestic and planting evidences at corners of streets. And with they don't even know. They don't even know that. There's an exception too. You figured it out with. But they also have judges and prosecutors putting fake things in databases, roles with victims advocates, collusions with both sides of cases, the courts and the victims, putting fake evidences in databases together, the same sequence shifts, the same collusion slash S. Whoever, there's a guy named Joe associated with the community, the Connecticut Capitol, and names next to it. Also, people with the name Casper are involved with identity theft, fraud, slanders. They act and other people take pictures to make it look like people knew people before they did, or at all. In other words, I never saw a Chuck Casper on a hike when I went to Hikers at all, ever on my campus. I saw him one time real quick just to verify over at middle school. And I found out increasingly they were involved with people with the name. No, they lied about me to a Potter family. All exceptions to when I said crazy things, whatever, on Facebook, whatever. That they were hiding how I was getting confirmations from people on Facebook and things. Like people I never responded to, like the Robert Rodriguez who brought the principal child abusers campus to me first. No. And they forced that. And they arrested me for harassment. I never even got to tell them anything. They kept saying all these fake things and leaving all these messages saying more fake things and making all these confessions. Increasingly, they have people named Cololo and Smith near me. And they're trying, and a whole bunch of people tied to them are starting fights with me. And the police are making confessions over the phone. And they pretended I had conversations with them when I was a kid. And now when I was an adult. And there are people with the name Scalora involved with people from the neighboring countries like Mexico and with the neighboring states like New Mexico. People involved with the FBI, with the Scalora family, and with the courts family members, with the ones on my street involved with all kinds of. These are people with the businesses and houses next to Harvard Hospital through time, involved with their family members, criminally foreign influence, tactically delusions raw, with the people at Harvard Hospital's Institute of Living, the lawyers with them, their family members, their social ties, in other words, the security there. Their patients that run in, they have overt criminal enterprises and private ones. Even if that's where they're doing with the military, state guys that way. The criminally foreign influence, tactically delusions, raw collusion slash S with the interbranch forging and switching names, and they got their kids involved. And they've got the news involved at the same time, collusion slash S, that's all recorded. But they won't get on paper, one name in sequence. So please do what's right for them. And Chris Hoff, that was you. Please do what's right for them. You know what you did right to everybody. You guys go weak. No way. Look at the infrastructure that the ancient people built. In other words, you guys have communicated than our founders communicated for us to have communicated for James Madison and for his plan that our founders used. That which gave the leverage to George Washington to have means to come to Hartford and to Wethersfield before the last battle of the Revolutionary War, and to force that nature of counter extortion to begin the first phase of separating ourselves from internationally monitored conversations, not because they're internationally monitored, because they were internationally monitored for a breaching method. That was a breaching method slash S, because the plural parts were all the roles. And roles blaming other things other than themselves. Oh, it's dictatorship. Let's focus on the predicate acts with facts regarding the black people's rights of eyes. In the Facebook, Wethersfield police have been switching and forging names. I want to warn you guys not to change or fake my words regarding the predicate acts with that. A whole bunch of people. There's an Inspector Mike with the fire departments involved with the people from the other countries, including Russia and Ukraine, involved with the police, making confessions, switching and forging names, and wasting my time intercities, and with their rules with the campuses, including people influenced the educators of and as people with the name Luigi Guerrero. I don't know. There's a female in his family, females associated with him, and a Jonathan Maiano involved with foreign and domestic military, and with the interbranch. A whole bunch of people in the Britain Superior Court involved with organized crimes with them, with falsified police reports rolls, with names on my street involved with child defenders with them, knowingly, but also or not. That's why it's important to get them on paper with the interbranch forging and switching names through time. And not leave out these natures, because there's a John DeMorrow further involved too with a Ruth who's involved who's next to the people from other countries involved next to the Board of Education in Old Wethersfield, involved with sexual and medical abuses of little boys and girls, with overt criminal enterprises and private ones, mixing with the conversations at grammar schools and middle schools, and involved with them too, with identity theft, fraud, slanders, putting kids that don't even know each other tied to each other, putting fake motivations for it. Increasingly, they lied to Rita Swanky about me, and putting fake ties, fake natures of ties between us, and why and how we met, with people all along Ridge Road involved with retired police chiefs from Wethersfield and other agencies, including the FBI, former FBI Director Robert Luskin, including James Comey, and increasingly they have collusions at West Hartford locations with New Britain Superior Courts families and Hartford Courts families, including with the names next to a body dumping spot, who are also increasingly involved with people involved with child abusers, leaders of the kids, years apart. The same names who were involved with that were also involved with the elderly homes and the spots next to them, and security coming on and off those locations. In other words, let's get them on paper, one name in sequence. In other words, two, this guy has roles with mold. Had us build mold. Didn't tell us it could be dangerous. Mr. Bernstein involved with Alan Bernstein, Stephen Bernstein, and David Bernstein. I don't know if they have a sister. In other words, but these are people in my sixth grade class, increasingly involved with people in my fifth grade class, fourth grade class, like a Sal Civiello. I never had communications with him in my fourth grade class. His neighbors are increasingly involved with various natures of organized crimes, with news people involved with body dumping spots and murders, and various natures of federal criminals before they were caught, who are involving in themselves consciously, building upon predicate acts with facts, pretended into databases. And these are roles, needs, and natures where they have their religious differences and their cultural and physical differences, and the ones of others used remotely, criminally foreign influence, tactically delusions raw, which is also one of the things that has been happening since founding. Also, there are a whole bunch of ways to say, I don't see the evidences. With your evidence, and criminally foreign influence ways, tactically delusions wrought ways. So all names on all sides of criminal and civil cases, like a Ray Colol reportedly has mentioned me in a civil case with a girl to make it look like I knew into records, but he's involved with a whole bunch of people. Their father's name is Ray Colol too, involved with these town offices, Wethersfield town offices, with various natures of organized crime and child offenders and people involved with identity theft, fraud, slanders, with the public television, public access television, government access television. In other words, they're also being, in other words, we could build better than free, way better. Just building off the base of what's already there too. Why do why just keep rebuilding that stuck on worse than stupid base, criminally foreign influence / hyper criminally foreign influence? It's not just England that was the possession of America. It wasn't England didn't have possession of itself. They don't even remember the history of English. They have to act. What's it? Oh, please, people. That's why I see ancientgamingsystem.com. Alphabet Cyber is there. Prepare. No, so for real. Get them on paper, one name and sequence. There are more people involved with the picture. There are pictures of a Leahy family's kids involved with more sexual and medical offenders of kids, including ones with judges and prosecutors involved with various natures of organized crimes. With this Leahy family that faked the conversations with me, they have roles with forging names of doctors, all kinds of scams, wire mail crime acts and methods. These are also people with Wethersfield police. When I was a kid, they faked conversations with me. And then when I was an adult, and a whole bunch of people from other areas recorded, confessed, demonstrated, confirmed on my street when I was a kid. And then as an adult, a Leahy family is involved with them. A whole bunch of people were involved with the Brian Silver, with Connecticut's District Court, and with the New Britain Superior Court and Harper Courts and their family members, involved with the state judicial branch offices, criminally foreign influence, tactically delusions raw, including people with the World Trade Center, involved with identity theft, fraud, slanders when I was a kid, and then when I was an adult. And I had no communications at all with them when I was a kid, and now they're hiding and changing the communications I did, and they're being used to censor for the breaching method. They shouldn't make me beg to get me off the fake conversations with WFSB, Connecticut's Channel 3 News, about the they had with me about the World Trade Center attack. They put me in fake locations with themselves and with others, and they had they did the same thing too when I was forced when they were as for roles forcing a principal child abuser and other natures of organized crimes in those fake conversations with me, and that was collusion/S also with WT&H and their sources, who planted evidences on corners of the streets with that at the same time, and along these are people all along Route 175 and conjunctions to it like Ridge Road, increasingly involved with various natures of organized crime, identity theft, fraud, slanders. In other words, inter differences, racketeering, where including the services. There's a Paul Kelly who will tell you he doesn't know me at all, unless he's lying to you. I was just in his presence. They could make a fake exception a couple times, and I had no communications with him. I was only playing. In other words, they try to make fake exceptions of him knowing me. They have their family members too involved, increasingly, all along. People with the name Violet recorded, confessed, demonstrated, confirmed them involved with them. Also in Elm Street in Rocky Hill. Also a Dr. Shub with modern languages has his family involved with courts and police forms, including the FBI, before and after the World Trade Center intercities, with people also next to the campuses as ones involved with Elm Streets and Rocky Hill and Town Line Drive and Two Rod Highway. And Town Line Drive, Two Rod Highway, and hanged where it runs into Hang Dog Lane, and the exceptions of it to it, like Route 3, which goes by the judicial branch offices, and the Burlington Turnpike before the heart of Hartford. So people from this breaching method has criminally foreign influence uses of location/S everywhere. Human species body has a body. That's why you're not supposed to fake and change what people communicate. It's all right. You want to have difference with someone about what. In other words, I said bad things on Facebook, but they started it. And in other words, they can't. Then they want to have them. They want to have. Then they want to have a debate about something like that. They can't afford the proper outcome. That's why they can't afford to get on paper without switching sequences and names and using all that comes before them now, and that has come before them to cover up how they were used remotely. So it's important to understand too the names next to the campuses are being and have been attached to fake ties, fake natures of ties, completely, to kids and to adults relative to that as the ones connected with this. In other words, a whole bunch of identities of such and such that are incapable of not faking and changing what others say when we mention predicate acts, let alone predicate acts methods. Whole methods of predicate acts are recorded. Predicate acts with facts like wire crime acts and methods that are hyper additional to the relative falsified police reports. Wethersfield police have fake conversations with me when I was a kid and now as an adult. They have more people with the family members. They have a dead husband of a teacher, for example, involved further with natures of organized crimes with the kids. It won't have to be that unless you want to have it because we never had a personal conversation at all, too. So fear God to play games with that and get the heck on paper. And she should fear God to pretend that she had a conversation with me. And with the courts and the police forms tied to her, well, they better get on paper. And I want a response for the confessions that the principal child abuser and the others that brought him up to me and the others that were involved with that. Police recorded, confessed, demonstrated, confirmed the name Scalora and Colo. Colo said that Scalora is their cousin. So did Demorals, ones with Demorals. They have all kinds of wire crime acts and methods through time. They have rules with all names on all sides of criminal and civil cases, use remotely criminally foreign influence in the court, and their family members putting fake things in databases, fake phone conversations, including with the police, changing and faking what's actually digitally recorded too. Fear God, to hide and plot. Who disbelieves? Let's get them on paper. Let's go.